Good morning, everyone. We are right on time. If you can see the agenda, we've got an ESSER update. We have 10 days before closeout, and our ESSER team, led by Wendy Fons, is going to give us a quick update on the conclusion of the last bucket of ESSER, ESSER 3, and EANS, which is the non. We also are going to talk about math science and some wonderful news that the federal government believes in Montana enough in the not just the investment of a new assessment, but believes that the pathway of middle school recognizing through year with science is something that the nation has not experienced before. So Montana is leading that way. And then another celebration, Christy Mock-Stutz is going to discuss another gift given to us on a new literacy grant and a little bit of a timeline on when we'll be having that grant going out for our schools in a competitive framework. Then we have assessment results. So Cedar Rose has given these, they were embargoed, and she has given these to the Board of Public Ed last week. And our school districts received these almost 2 weeks ago in recognition of their own results immediately, but then recognition of where they sit within the rest of the state of Montana. And then, of course, we have a full year of everyone, our 6,000 students, third grade through eighth grade, in our state wide assessment. We are not in a pilot frame anymore. We are 100% all in on through year with assessment in math and reading. And then, of course, Crystal Andrews is going to give us accreditation process. Last week at the Board of Public Ed, it was Crystal Andrews Day again. And so we're excited to hear what she has to say for us today. So Wendy, if you would please lead the way and where we are in the great celebration with ESSER.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And this is, of course, one of the documents that we use both with the Board of Public Ed and with the legislators to kind of go over where we are with ESSER. And as the superintendent indicated, we are in our last countdown. Anybody who looks at our website sees the wonderful countdown going through our screen. In the last couple of days with ESSER spending, then we will conclude with sort of the documentation that goes with it. And a couple of points I wanted to mention here. One is we do have 400 plus school districts that we're working with, and that includes the non-public schools who received EANS funding. In looking at that, we had we have currently about 17% that is remaining still to be not distributed. So I want to be very clear that all the funds have been distributed. All the funds have been spent at a local level, but it is the processing that has to happen, and that view within eGrants needs to occur. So that 17% is still out there for us to finalize on the processing side. And that is about where we were with ESSER 2 last year. So school districts are pushing forward. They're working strong and closing all of that out. We are doing individual sessions with all the districts in that closeout to look at grant compliance, to look at consistency of documentation, and to look at that final spending to make sure that it is all spent. We are available. The ESSER team is available 6 days a week from 7 in the morning until usually 7 o'clock at night, and again on Saturday. And a lot of the reason for that is we recognize that there's school districts who may be sharing a business manager and they can't be at 2 places at the same time. So there's a flexibility of their schedule. We actually also had, it was really nice this morning, I had 2 business managers reach out who are actually retired, but they have come back to work with the districts to finalize ESSER. And so they may not work on a quote, 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock timeframe. So we're accommodating them as well. In the closeout, we are moving forward to help others also share what they have learned. So we're talking a lot about how the results are being shared out, that large data collection process we did. We're talking about how do you use that data going forward? What can you do with that data to help build capacity for future grants going forward? We are doing, and we sent out some notices back in April. We sent them again out in July, and we'll be sending them out again today with regards to if any districts are returning any funds. And I say a big if because I don't think that's going to happen. But if they are, we have a form that is being filled out, and then we're trying to pool that in sort of a sick leave type policy process in that it's pooled together and able to be distributed. We heard a lot from districts last year when we did ESSER 2 that they did not want to receive $1 to have to go back and reprocess. So we asked them to clarify and to say whether or not they wanted any funds if it becomes available, and also to identify any high-risk need areas, such as in the area of mold, asbestos, lead, any of those sort of major health issues that may have occurred in a district. And so we've been getting those sort of trickling in. Again, a reminder will go out today on that. Another point of clarification is the waiver versus liquidation extension. Those are two very, very different things. And so whenever I talk about waivers, I tend to say it's the state waiver. What that was done for, and we have requested it through the Department of Education, is the fact that we recognize that districts need assistance in closing out these files. And so we have asked to have an extension on our funds, administrative funds, to help districts do that closeout. And that is in the process. The liquidation extension relates to school district spending of the funds. And repeatedly over the last 12 months, whenever this topic comes up, districts typically say, no way, I want to be done. So we are recognizing that and trying to help them work with it. However, it was an option. So it's been out there for over a year on our website. We have noted it several times. We had some districts indicate they might be interested in looking at an extension. We did work with them. We had one actually earlier this week who moved from a need to do an extension maybe to let's switch the funds and go ahead and have it all spent down. So just keeping in mind, these ESSER funds are amendable, and a clean process to get it all finished by September 30th is in the best interest of everyone. School districts have repeatedly told us that, and we are working very hard with providing a strong system of support to help close that out. So that's kind of in the closeout process. Brian will send out sort of these stats, which I generally cover all the time, so you can go back and look at that. I think what's important here to look at in this big pie is that 90% of this funding did go to the schools, and we really want to start sharing out what those goals have, what goals have been accomplished with those fundings, and help the public, the general public, just know how important those funds were as we go forward as school districts and ask for additional funding in the next couple of years. I stand for any questions if there are any out there.
Thank you, Wendy. And I know we have with our interim budget committee, we'll also be giving a very, very simple overview of this as we do our closeout. Just as a reminder as well, we have given dollars of ESSER to, and all of our data to the economics department under the lead of Dr. Urban and Dr. Stoddard at MSU to review all of our data of what our schools use the dollars for under the allowances that the federal government through these 3 buckets of money came to. Simple presentation also occurred on our 4-day school week. We also gave dollars to the University of Montana to really recognize learning and where that is at this point. We've accelerated that contract a little bit more to really dive into the data as we look at learning loss and the opportunity of learning that was disrupted during the COVID period of time. But any questions for Wendy at this point? All right. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Go ahead and move on then. We've got Crystal Smith. We're going to be talking about a competitive grant with science, and this is about middle school.
Good morning, and thank you, Superintendent. I believe Brian's going to pull my slides up there. Thank you, Brian, for that. So yeah, I'm excited to share the news about Montana being awarded our second CGSA grant. If you remember, Montana received our first CGSA grant back in 2022. We used that to pilot and develop a 3-year assessment for math and ELA, which, as the superintendent mentioned in her opening, will be our statewide assessment for this upcoming year. So piggybacking off that, the competitive grants for state assessment, which is provided by the Department of Education, with the intent to really scale up and enhance and improve the quality of assessment systems for states that apply for those grants, was awarded to Montana, I believe a couple weeks ago, for a few dollars less than $4 million, which is what this award amount was. Montana's plan, which was submitted back in, I want to say maybe May is when we submitted our application, was really to scale up and to improve a science 3-year model for middle school students grades 6, 7, and 8. So Montana was one of 10 states, nationwide to receive this grant, which is a 4-year competitive grant. Next slide, please. So we understand and recognize, as well as our stakeholders, a need for change. So as we were out on the roadshow back in April, again in August, we heard from a lot of our districts and our stakeholders, when are we going to do this for science? So we were excited to hear that a CGSA grant would be a great opportunity to generate funds and partner again with New Meridian to help support this work. Teachers had mentioned in the concern that science instruction is really placed on 5th and 8th grade students or teachers, because that was the only time that science was being assessed for federal accountability for those students. So we are looking and excited to be able to kind of share the wealth of science assessment throughout the entire middle school opportunity for students, as well as provide the instructional usefulness and score reports, which we currently have with our math and ELA model. Here's a timeline for our rollout. So we will be beginning this year, the remainder of this year and into next year, planning and preparations for our pilot. Pilot and field test science items will happen in 2026, moving into an expanded pilot in 2027, and then statewide rollout in grades 6 through 8 in the 28-29 school year. So as if you remember the runway, for rolling out MAST in our math and ELA grades 3 through 8. You can see again, we have this long on-ramp for ensuring that we have the planning and the preparation in place before we start the pilot and field testing items and moving through that in sequential years, which will be funded through the grant that we received. Next slide, please. So through our work with the National Center for Assessment, partners with Education First, and just hearing from our stakeholders here in the state of Montana, we know that there's tremendous benefit for a 3-year, and we believe that benefit holds true for science. So the science testlets will be aligned to school level scope and sequencing of science standards. So whether school districts teach all of Earth science 1 year, life science the next, and physical science in 8th grade, or a smattering of those throughout, they will have the opportunity to align these different testlets to the district scope and sequence. We're excited because this is going to be, again, a Montana assessment made by Montanans, that we will be able to integrate authentic EFA components into passages and the assessment model. There's a lot of work and research done for interdisciplinary and cross-cutting scientific themes, and we're going to be able to interweave and build those into these different science testlets. We're excited about the concept of utilizing a warm-up activity prior to assessments to ensure that all students have the same background and understanding of science concepts before actually taking the science testlets. And then equally as important, that timely information of the content that's taught and the feedback provided to teachers, so they have the opportunity to intervene and support student learning throughout the opportunities that they have with them in their classroom. I'd like to close with our next steps. You'll notice that QR code up there. That is to the superintendent's press release. So if you're looking for more information and want to see the actual press release that I think came out about a week ago, utilize that QR code to access that. But here in the next couple of months before the end of 2024, we are meeting with the Department of Education to learn more about what they're expecting from Montana and to really strengthen that partnership, as the superintendent alluded to, that the department really is leaning on Montana and signaling to us that they believe in the work that we have done in the most recent years with math and ELA, and then continuing to support this through financing and funds moving forward into science. We'll continue to partner with the National Center for Assessment on a theory of action for science. So again, that's gathering the stakeholders around the state of Montana educational leaders in all different facets and communities coming together to have a common voice on what they would like to see before that planning and preparation leads us into 2025. So we can use that theory of action as kind of our guiding light for the work that will be happening. And then we know you just can't change an assessment without changing the support that we're providing the field in order to do what with the assessment. So we are working to partner with several professional learning agencies and corporations to be able to bring in very high quality, in-depth support for our fantastic teachers around the state to not only look at a new assessment model and be able to use that, but really to maximize and get the greatest amount of change and improvement in teaching and learning in our state. So with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Crystal. Any questions at all regarding this nuance of an middle school science and the through year? Perfect. Also want to share with our partners with the Board of Public Education that we've done a lot of work in assessment together, and there's still one other thing that is left. So just a tangential item to this is that secondary assessment. Currently, we are with ACT. ACT, though, and the structure of the contract and the dollar flow to pay for the ACT is not part of any of the federal monies that we receive from the federal government. So our partnership and working forward is having a Montana-made assessment looking like what it might be in secondary. And I know we foreshadowed this and want to continue the great work in 2025 and putting other things together before the close of this calendar year. But a lot of work has gone into really recognizing teaching and learning. So a great shout out to our team and the teachers that helped build this. So thank you, Crystal, and your team. Let's move on then to another celebration, as I'd said earlier. Christy, let's go ahead and visit about literacy, reading.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen to pull up some bullet points here. And there we go. And I wanted to share the great news. Many of you saw the press release that came out about this, but the OPI was awarded a nearly $50 million comprehensive state literacy development grant. So this grant is over 5 years. And the funding for this grant comes in a staggered budget for us this year. We have a smaller amount coming in the first year to support implementation of the new grant, getting it off the ground, and then grows in the second and third year, and then begins to taper off in the fourth and fifth year. And we designed that specifically in the application to support the programs that you see outlined here in the bullets on the screen. Some things that are different in this upcoming literacy grant are really a focus on building a community of practice, building community of practices within schools, building community of practices across the state. So those schools that are eligible and apply and are accepted into the grant as a sub-grantee will have access to a statewide literacy leadership network. They will have access to professional development to support implementation of evidence-based practices in their classrooms. Another exciting part of this grant is our work with our institutes of higher education across the state. We're really working with them on mentorship and collaboration programs, again, to support building those evidence-based practices and sustainable practices within classrooms across Montana for all of our students. And then supporting teachers in building their instructional methodologies and really understanding how to instruct in literacy, to identify, to read the data, and to move forward in their literacy practices within their classrooms. So we're really excited about the opportunities in this grant to support schools to build their own capacities. into December, the OPI will notify eligible districts that they are eligible to apply for this competitive grant program. We'll open those applications and then we'll move through that application process in the spring. So our next steps will be to notify districts by December so that all the districts that are eligible for this opportunity know they're eligible and can begin to plan their application process for this next round of grants. Are there any questions for me on this exciting news?
Thank you, Christy. I think we all know that this dovetails really nicely into the early literacy requests that have come from our previous legislative session, recognizing that learning how to read is going to be an investment all the way through their K-12 and post-secondary and even into their lifespan. So very pleased that we are going to be partnering then moving forward in what this looks like in the entire K-12 space. More information to come soon. We'll put it out there as that. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Christy. Let's go to the assessment results. Good morning, Cedar.
Good morning, Superintendent. I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing. And I have the opportunity to talk about two different topics today as they pertain to statewide assessment. So the first that I'll be covering is our recent release of our 2023-2024 statewide assessment data. So I'm going to give you a high-level review today. This is a very robust data set. I pulled out some high points and some visualizations that I think really paint the picture of where our students currently are, as well as pulling out some of the interesting things that we had with this data set this year with our MAST field test waiver. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump in. I'm going to give a short overview of our release timeline, how we release that time, how we release the results, how districts get to see it. We're going to talk about some of those waived reporting for our MAST field test for participating schools, which is really exciting from that Department of Education waiver that we were granted. We're going to go through grades 3 through 8 math and ELA data, grade 11 math and ELA data from our ACT assessment, and then we'll just cap it off with our science assessment in grades 5, 8, and 11. This is our data release timeline. This is very similar to what we followed in past years. Our students and our schools are able to get those individual student reports after testing is finished. So in our summative model, kids test from March until May. They have to go through that scoring process, and then weeks later, they're able to get that data back on their individual student score report. So with that, schools have a sense of how they're doing, but until we get that all together within our GEMS longitudinal data system, we really don't have those statewide comparisons. On September 3rd, we open up GEMS for a district embargo, so our school leaders can go ahead and see how they're doing at the school level, the district level, and the state level. That's not open for public access until September 10th. So on September 10th, a week ago, we published that data for everyone to see. We had a media release, education interim committee report, presented this information to the Board of Public Education, and then education advocates today. So something very different about this year's data set is it wasn't based on all of our eligible students in our state for grades 3 through 8 in math and ELA. And that was due to that really exciting and unique field test waiver that we received from the Department of Education. So last August, August of 2023, we were awarded that field test waiver from the Department of Education, allowing our schools who are participating in MAST to be able to not have to double test. We put in for that waiver based on our pilot year the year before, where we saw, the end of the year became really tricky for our schools who are participating with Fidelity through the MAST pilot to also have to double test. And so that was a big vote of confidence from the Department of Education saying, we believe in this model, and to further this model and to further the development of the assessment within that field test, we want to make sure that you're getting the data that you need. And so with that, we had 218 students or 218 schools that decided to participate in that pilot with Fidelity. So those scores due to that field test waiver are not included in that because it's a field test. We use that for assessment development purposes, and those are not publicly available. They're really used for getting our tests ready for our statewide operational assessment this year. So with that, the data that I'm going to present on 3rd through 8th grade math and ELA is based on 36,000 students, which is 54% of our state. And that's, like I said, that's only including our Smarter Balance and our Montana or our multi-state alternative assessment. One exciting thing that we saw out of our data this year for our students who took the Smarter Balanced assessment is, like we said, we had about 54% of our students take that and have reportable data, but we wanted to make sure that our demographics were comparable, not just in the data that we were releasing publicly, but also in the data we collected through that field test. And so here are some of those key subgroups that we monitor with their scores, but also we want to make sure that we have that representative sample for MAST. And as you can see, that dotted line is at 54% of eligible students. And for most of our subgroups, we were very close to that 54%. So it really signals that our data that we have presenting today and in our statewide results are comparable, as well as our MAST data from our field test. Going to go into our math proficiency levels. So this is showing our percent of students who took the assessment who are in our novice, nearing proficient, proficient, and advanced. For our statewide proficiency levels, we deem any students that are in the proficient or advanced as proficient. So as you can see from our post-pandemic years, we've had a steady increase in the number of students, or the percent of students who are demonstrating proficiency in mathematics, which is really good to see that we're seeing that upward trend. This gives a more longitudinal view and is able to see what happened after that pandemic and before that pandemic. So obviously in the 1920 school year, as well as the 2020-2021 school year, we had a lot of learning disruption. So we continue to monitor what the effects of the pandemic were on our assessment scores and on our students. And this is one data point that gives us some insight. So as you can see, that 2020 moving on data point is we have that steady increase that we're really excited to see with math, but we are still performing below where we saw students prior to that learning disruption during the 1920 school year. This is showing comparing different groups of students, but the same grade level overall. So if we look at, say, this light blue line up top, each data point is a different group of students, but this is how our third graders in that current year are performing. So not just an overall improvement with our proficiency levels for math, but we're also seeing each one of our grade levels having an increase. A little bit more stagnation in that third and fourth grade, but we saw some improvements the past year. So this is really promising, especially when we look at our middle school grades. That's been a big focus, is making sure that our middle schoolers are also getting those math skills, as we sometimes see a decrease in performance for those grade levels. So it's nice to see that our 5th through our 8th graders showed a steady increase. Also 11th grade data point, we'll look a little bit more in depth with those ACT data, but we see that that's pretty similar performance to last year, but I think something that was really exciting that we saw in last year's data was an overall increase for all of our areas for our 11th graders. So after that big increase that we saw last year, to have that increase hold out, still below where the rest of our students are performing, but still promising to see. And this is our cohort data, and this is something that we've started to look at in the last few years, to not just look at how grade levels are doing, but how student groups are doing. So in this view, you're able to track, if you go through the diagonal, the actual group of students. So for instance, if we are looking at this year's 11th graders, we are seeing that they have about 0.7% decrease in proficiency levels from where they were as 8th graders the last time they assessed. And then also we can compare how they did pre and post pandemic. So this bottom row is showing how they performed difference from 11th to 8th grade. And then this column on the right is our pre to post. So what we are seeing, and this is a trend that we saw last year, is we're making up ground, so that we are still performing, especially in math, where we are below the pandemic. But every year we're getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer to where we were before the pandemic. And I think that this is much more clear in math. And ELA will talk about some interesting data points that we've seen with some of our younger learners. But for our 11th graders, for our 8th graders, we're slowly making up ground, but we know that the amount of learning loss that happened in the 1920 school year still needs a lot of work surrounding it to get caught up. Just an overview of our subgroup data. Like I said before, we really monitor our subgroup data to see how certain additional groups of students are performing. If we look at this, some things that, or some subgroups that are following trends are our economic disadvantage and our special education. Although those students are performing below the rate of proficiency, they're still showing that upward trend that we're seeing with our overall statewide student group. Two groups that we are seeing some stagnation and growth, as well as performing well below the state level averages, are English language learners and our American Indian students. So not only they're below their grade level peers, but they are also not showing that upward trend that we like to see. So once again, student group information gives us a direction on where we need to focus some of our efforts, and a great data point for us to look at moving forward. Moving on to ELA, we'll go through those same set of visualizations. While we are seeing math having that steady increase post-pandemic, ELA, we're seeing a little bit more of a decrease, about a percentage of proficiency every year. So we're seeing more students in that novice range and less students in that advanced range. So we're seeing that decrease post-pandemic. And then as we can see, we almost had a little bit of that trend starting before that pandemic year. And so we saw that steep drop, and then we're, like I said, about a percentage point or less every single year, knowing that this year is based on less students. Here's that same comparing students at specific grade levels throughout their time. One thing that I'm sure that your eye was drawn towards was that 11th grade. So we saw that increase in performance last year, which was wonderful to see. Even if we compare to how our 11th graders were doing before the pandemic, last year was a historically high proficiency level for us for our 11th graders, which is great to see. And even though we had a small drop, that is still very minimal. And we are still well above where we were before the pandemic, which is great to see that success for our 11th graders in ELA. As for the rest of our grades, we kind of have a mixed bag of what's going on. So we're going to talk about our third graders on that cohort slide next, but we're seeing, our 6th and our 8th graders having a little bit of a decrease, our 5th, 4th, and 7th having a little bit of an increase. So not showing the same trends that we saw in math where everyone is going in the same direction. So it gives us a little bit more reason to dig into this data. So when we dig into our cohort data, one thing that we are seeing that is drastically different from what we've seen in past years is lower performance in our 3rd grade levels, which is really interesting to see. So looking at this cohort view, we are able to backtrack where these 3rd graders were when they started their early educational career. And they were kindergartners the year after the pandemic. So when we think about, well, how will that influence, their reading skills, their early literacy, their phonemic awareness? Well, they were kindergartners in potentially a hybrid situation and wearing masks when they're learning to read. So you can imagine the impact that has on those early literacy skills as you're learning to go through, the phonemic awareness, any of those language acquisition skills. So this will be a group of students we continue to monitor. As, like I said, that data point for our 3rd graders is quite abnormal from what we were seeing. Our 11th graders, just to highlight, we talked about the further we're getting away from the pandemic, the better that increase in student performance is. And we can really see that in that 8th to 11th difference every year. Our 11th graders are performing better than they did as 8th graders. And then as well, our 8th graders still have a little bit of that gap from the pre-pandemic, which a 5.5% decrease in proficiency levels. But our 11th graders are performing, we have 1.5% higher rates of proficiency than we did before the pandemic. So we're really excited to see that gap not just being closed, but performing better than they did in their 8th grade year and before the pandemic. Subgroup data as well. A lot of these are following those same trends. So our English language learners, our economic disadvantage, are showing that downward trend that we're seeing with our statewide proficiency. Our special education, we're showing a little bit of an increase, which is really promising to see. Still below our statewide proficiency rates, but to see that increase is really promising. And then once again, our American Indian students have that downward trend that we are seeing with our overall state population and well below the statewide proficiency average. One final view that we want to talk through in our math and ELA is this year's current data. So no longitudinal data, but this is how our certain grade level students are performing. So our math and our green, as I pointed out, we traditionally see our 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders performing a little bit lower. So the fact that they are increasing this year was really great to see that from last year's sixth graders to this year's sixth graders, there's an increase of proficiency. Our ELA, that data point that I highlighted out, is that our third graders are performing lower than what we expect traditionally on that third grade data point. So once again, data that we can continue to track and really set a direction for our movements forward. These are just those key points. I will make sure that Brian has these slides to be able to send out so you can go and review those key points, but these are just those things that I talked about throughout. And then briefly on our 11th grade data. So our 11th grade, as the superintendent mentioned, we use our ACT assessment. That was a full statewide administration. We have pretty comparable participation rates that we've seen in the past, at 92 to 93%. So we're looking at about 10,000 students when it comes to these data points. Our composite score for ACT had a 1/10 of a point drop, and that's after that huge increase we saw from an 18.6 to a 19.4 last year. So anytime we see a huge increase in data, we get a little wary that, you know, other things could have been influencing that, but the fact that we are showing that consistency and performance is really good, and it shows that that growth that we saw last year was very valid. Here's those proficiency levels. You will see that math, we had a slight increase from our last year after that 2022 data year to 2023 data year increase. So students, like I said, in 11th grade performed a little bit better, showing that statewide or average trend of all of our grades increasing. ELA, we had a slight decrease, and that's what's probably drawing down that composite score to that 1/10 of that point, was that decrease. We are still, if we look at our longitudinal data, our ELA scores are still above what we were seeing pre-pandemic. So we are seeing great recovery and performance for our 11th graders in the area of ELA. Just highlight on science proficiency, not a ton of changes that we saw. So our MSA, our Montana Science Assessment, and alternate Montana Science Assessment in grades 5 and 8, a small decrease in our proficiency level. But pretty comparable to our previous years. We are seeing that steady decrease. Prior to the 2022 school year, we were in a operational field test, so we don't get data back from that. So only have 3 years of data for that. For our 11th grade, very similar to what we have last year, with about 30% proficiency for our students in 11th grade. So I think that this data, with 40% students of proficient in 5th through 8th grade, or 5th and 8th grade, and then 30% in 11th grade, it really helps strengthen the argument around going to a 3-year model in science. Because when we think we're assessing ELA or assessing science just 3 times a year, we are now sending that message that science is so important that we need to have that constant measurement from 5th through 8th grade to make sure that our students are making those improvements. Because what we don't like to see is a higher proficiency level in 5th and 8th grade than our 11th grade. So really excited to be able to move forward with that 3-year model to help support some much needed growth around the science area. We have all of this data and much more on our GEMS longitudinal data warehouse that you can go ahead and explore. But our data this year, like I said, very consistent from last year's, but sets us a clear direction on where we need to move forward.
Thank you, Cedar. Any questions for Cedar? A lot of information flow. This document will come out after this meeting concludes, and has also been directed. Jump on our website with GEMS and see exactly where we may compare with other schools, small, large, across our state. I'd like to go back. Trish, I see you've got your hand up. If you would like to ask your question, it might be on the reading grant. I may have jumped too soon.
No, thank you so much, Superintendent. Yes, I do have a number of questions for Christy on the reading grant, but I actually have a question for Cedar as well. I've spent the last few, I don't know how many days since your press release on GEMS, and I really like the slides, especially the longitudinal and the cohort slides, and I look forward to getting those. Of course, I took snapshots on my screen as well. Like, oh wait, this is coming. My question is, this is the kind of data I was looking for on GEMS, and I couldn't even get it down to a single grade because it's combining 3 through 8. So I'm wondering, is that possible for the public to be able to go into GEMS and to get that information you just shared?
Yeah, Trish, absolutely. So you can go in under each one of those visualizations, there is a drop down to further filter that data. So you can go ahead and you can select which specific grade levels you want to pull. All of my data is pulled from GEMS. So I know you can access it. If you want some support on that, feel free to reach out to me with the assessment team, and we can set up a meeting to walk through how to get that data. But you can go down to the grade level, you can go down to that subgroup data. It's just picking the right drop down. So feel free to reach out to me and I will happily walk you through that.
Thank you. I did try doing that, but I thought I was still getting the condensed information. So I probably will reach out. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay. Going back to Christy. Hi, Christy. Thank you so much for this report. So I just had a few quick questions. The CSGA grant, I know that that's coming from the Department of Education, but I missed, did you say where the $50 million grant was coming from for the literacy project?
Yes, Trish, that's also from the Department of Education as well.
Okay. And my next question is, in working with the Institutes of Higher Education in Montana, I'm wondering if that means that they are also going to be adapting their own teacher preparation programs to instruct candidates in teaching literacy in their classrooms from the get-go. Is that a change we're going to see in this?
Trish, that's an excellent question. And yes, a part of the grant and what we wrote into the grant and really working with our educator preparation programs here is to look over their coursework for their general education and their literacy coursework to make sure that it's aligning and supporting those evidence-based practices right from the get-go with our new teachers, and also then layering that in with those mentoring and coaching supporting programs for districts to support new teachers and also teachers who maybe have been teaching for a few years as well. And so that all layers together to provide that robust support, but right from the get-go, right from those training when our teachers are learning in their classrooms. Exactly.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that, because I'm sure you guys saw the report. I can't even remember what institute did it, but they looked at all the institutions across the country, and Montana did not rate well. It's like a third of them were teaching, the science of reading to their candidates. And so that was alarming. So yay, I'm happy to hear that. My next question is, you had mentioned the eligibility criteria for the districts. And I'm wondering, is that too dictated by the grant, or did OPI decide that? And mainly, what is the eligibility criteria for the districts?
Right. And it will be high needs eligibility, Trish. And so we're working with our federal program manager to get the finalized criteria for that eligibility, but it is high needs. So it will be looking at, schools with high rates of free and reduced lunch, maybe the schools that have below a certain threshold for their statewide literacy assessments, as we just saw from CEDAR and the reading assessment scores, really targeting schools that may have an area of need with that. And we're still finalizing that with the federal program manager, but as soon as we have that, and we will be sharing that information too. But it really is based on high needs.
Okay. And do you have an idea of what percentage of our districts will qualify for that eligibility?
Not right now, but we do in the grant writing, we haven't run all of the numbers yet. But once we do, we anticipate it being, in the past, it's been about 30. It will probably be somewhere around that. But again, we'll know more once we run those numbers and we really get the grant underway. It's not fully underway yet, so we have to kind of wait until that grant starts going here to be able to run those numbers and get those answers.
Okay. Thank you. That makes sense. And then my next question is that within the parameters of this $50 million, are you guys looking at professional curriculum that supports the science of reading from K through 8, or are you guys looking to reinvent the wheel with curriculum here?
No, definitely. And, obviously with our local control states, our districts get to choose their curriculum, but as we're promoting and supporting, our instructional methodologies, it will all be based on those evidence-based practices. And the science of reading is one that we really consider and will bring in and work with our, again, with our EPPs, with our teachers and with our districts on that.
Okay, so I recently, Superintendent, I'm sure you know John White. I recently have been having some discussions with him, and what he did in Louisiana is very similar to this, and letting the districts kind of rate the curriculum that they had around the state, and then they narrowed it down to 3 high quality instructional materials that dealt with this. I'm wondering, are you guys looking at doing kind of that same approach, or like, are you guys going to be vetting the high quality instructional materials for
That
the
is,
curriculum and giving them a choice?
and I think that some of that will come within, the leadership, that literacy leader network that I was talking about, where the schools are going to be able to come together and have leadership teams at their school that come together with other leadership teams from across the state. I think that would be something that they would be looking into. We, of course, are going to support our schools in identifying high quality curriculum that will get them to, that has the evidence to support the learning that they need in their schools. So definitely we will be supporting that as part of this. And also it comes to the data literacy, right? So having schools understand the formative assessments, the summative assessments that they're using, reading the data so that they understand what their needs are in their schools and districts, and what curriculum will help to get them there in the most effective and efficient way. We'll be providing that support as well. So I hope that answers.
Oh, it does. I'm just so excited for the state. Congratulations. I think this is such a promising endeavor, and I'm probably likely to follow up on this more because I'm super interested. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Trish.
Thank you, Trish. And you're correct. Nationwide, especially in the southern states, Florida including, are looking more at a statewide curriculum model. Their legislature has done multiple work within both of those states have. As we are a local control state, what we can do is give great guidance, but pinpointing on what the great materials are, as well as making sure that our EPPs who create our Montana teachers are also aligned. So there's a large learning continuum for this. But the curriculum materials and everything else are governed at the local level, but definitely the state will have an influence on as we move through this grant further. So thank you for your excitement and your interest. I'm going to come back to Cedar real quick. Let's talk about the results with MAST and an update of as we open the door to our new TestLit model all the way through, not a pilot anymore. This is our statewide test.
Thank you, Superintendent. And like you said, next year at this time, we'll be able to be presenting our MAST statewide results as after the statewide operational year this year. We will go through the standard setting process with our Montana educators. We need about 100 of those to go through and set those proficiency levels, those performance level descriptors. And like I said, this will be our statewide measure for 3rd through 8th graders in math and ELA next year. So we've been busy supporting our state as we get ready to launch our first statewide window on October 14th. So we've been busy, we've been on the road, we've been providing a lot of support. So Crystal mentioned earlier about our summer road show. This is the second time that we have been on the road, traveling to 9 different locations around the state. About 2,000 miles we put on in about a week and a half, which was really exciting. But from August 9th to 17th, we were able to go to multiple points, meet with a lot of educators, leaders in person, really provide foundations for the technical support for the administration. Leading up to this, our last roadshow and our last summit that we had in the spring was more about, the vision, why we're going here. We are really to the point where we are preparing our schools for that. So over the course of those 9 locations, we had about 230 folks that were registered. We were able to connect with 82 superintendents or principals, 100 curriculum or testing coordinators, and spanning 185 schools, districts, cooperatives, or organizations. So a huge ability for us to connect. We also had ELA range finding in Bozeman halfway through that, where we brought together more educators to talk through and set the parameters for our performance task scoring. So as Crystal mentioned, for our MAST, our whole goal is by Montana for Montana. And so we have continued to carry that motto with us wherever we go. And our summer roadshow and meeting with those educators in person is just another example of that. Great opportunity for us to get feedback about things that we can change as well to make this the best assessment possible for our educators and students. A lot of professional learning and training opportunities. So we just last week wrapped up our MAST Summit. So that was on, or I guess 2 weeks ago. So I was on September 5th. That was an all-day virtual summit where we had some of our highlights. We were at an educator and student panel. So we had educators speaking about their experience in the pilot, what they're excited for. We had a student talking through what they really like about MAST. One key thing that he said is, we don't have to go to bed earlier for MAST like we did with our summative assessment, because it just feels like it's something that we're doing. And so we can see that our students have less anxiety around this assessment, and our educators speak of the promise of this assessment and also the ability of changes that we've made in the last year and a half of development to really make this tailored to Montana. We had speakers from the National Center for Assessment talking about instructional usefulness, and then as well as an assessment review guidance that Dr. Nathan Dady with the Center for Assessment has helped develop specific for Montana. As educators and schools are starting to think about, well, what data do we actually need to support learning? This tool really helps support them make those informed decisions of what data is being used for student learning and what data or assessments could we move away from, because they're really just giving us data, but not anything that helps change our behaviors to support student learning. So it was a great success. We had over 280 attendees. So it was a huge summit all day. We're really excited about it. And it really set the stage for our upcoming launch of our assessment in October. Some of the ways that we're supporting that is we have office hours twice a week for scheduler support. The novel thing and the exciting thing about MAST is schools are able to align their math curriculum to their testlet. So we are assessing what students are learning as close as possible. This is the last week of that. As of this morning, we had well over half of our state scheduled, and most of our state in the progress of that. So we're really, really excited to wrap that up this week. Once again, having that scheduler support twice a week for schools to come on, get that one-on-one support that they need. We'll continue to have those office hours outside of our scheduler time as well and throughout the year. We have, starting at the end of this month, we have weekly portal training. So we will go through once again that technical support, what students or what schools need to do every week to make sure that they are ready for the October 14th date. We're really focused on the professional learning throughout the year as well. So we, with our teaching and learning program and our standards team, we are going to talk about and provide guidance on using those score reports, because really the great thing about the assessment is not just the data, but what we can do with the data following up. So we're going to continue to have that professional learning. And then a key thing that we did in the past, we're going to keep doing, is listening sessions after each testing window to really hear from our educators. How is this working? Do things need to be adjusted? Once again, what are those promises, and how can we really make this by Montana for Montana? So we'll continue to support that. I just want to leave you with what our score reports look like for this year, radically different than what we've had in the past for a statewide assessment. So not only are we going to have basic performance bands of about how students are performing, but we're also going to have misconceptions for math. So an educator is going to be able to look at this and, based on how the student responded, to see where exactly do we need to pinpoint instruction and remediation. So that misconceptions part is so key and so exciting to help this really inform instruction. It'll talk about what standards were assessed on that test set, so you can see how students are doing on standards. And then also item level data, which is so exciting to be able to have, to see what was a question asking and how did my student do on it. The amount of value that teachers can get from this to inform those next steps and be able to do it in a timely manner is just so exciting. We will also provide testlet level score reports throughout each administration window. So not just can you have that student level view, but also the classroom level view as well. As a whole, how is my class doing? What are the misconceptions we're seeing throughout my class? And then how each one of my students are performing within their performance bands as well. If you have any questions about the statewide assessment data or MAST, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen, but so much movement in assessment, so many great things. We have such a great course moving forward to finally have assessments that serve learning, which is just, as educators and as a former educator, I always knew that was the purpose, but now we are making huge steps forward to make that purpose a reality.
Thank you, Cedar. Any questions? There seemed to be a lot on assessments today. Thank you for your excitement over this. But again, this is a partnership with the Board of Public Ed and wanting to make sure that, more importantly, that this is a Montana-made test for Montana teachers and students. So with that, we'll move to our last agenda item. Thank you for being patient. We have Crystal. Crystal, let's go ahead and share about the accreditation process. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I have 7 minutes and a lot of information, so I will do my best. So last week we were at the Board of Public Ed and got approved the accreditation process, excuse me, for the 24-25 school year. So I thought I'd start with the timeline that was approved, and then I'll talk quickly about some of the areas that you'll see for this upcoming school year. So like I said, in September, we had our approval of the process at the board meeting last week. Excuse me. Our first important date for districts is September 24th. That is when, I'm sorry, September 23rd is when the Criterion Reference Guide next Monday will be released to districts. That guide is the scoring rubrics and questions that districts will use to do the accreditation process this year. We will put out a press release. We'll make sure districts are aware, but that it will be live for districts on next Monday. And right now, districts should be working on their AIM information, so the Infinite Campus data. My accreditation team has partnered with the AIM team. We've been doing trainings. We've been across the state talking through what that looks like. Not only for their fall count for Infinite Campus, but how it is incorporated with the accreditation process this year. So hopefully that is getting done at the beginning of the year, and we don't have to do as much cleanup at the end of the year. The second important date, so first important date, September 23rd. The second important date is December 2nd. December 2nd is when the accreditation platform will open. I've been sharing with districts, and it's been a big sigh of relief that districts will be able to utilize this platform, not just a form, but this whole platform where they'll be able to save the information that they're putting in. They'll be able to see what it is, not have any limitation as to how many documents. So it is a full system that we'll be implementing this year that will be much easier to navigate through for the process. And the third and final date that's important for accreditation this year is February 28th, and that's when the accreditation submission deadline will be due. We're pushing it up about a month because, and on both sides, so it's going to open up over a month ahead of schedule from last year, but also close a month early so that we can get our scores done and the evaluation and data check done in March and April. And then have the information to the Board of Public Ed in May so that districts get that information before the end of the school year. This past year, having it be due the end of March, it pushed everything back. And so that it was at the July meeting, and after the school year had concluded, that information went out to districts, which was difficult to then have the addendum process and districts be aware of all the next steps. So we're hopeful that this is a better timeline and will work for districts. I will, how do I have 4 minutes? Okay. I will go up quick, and Brian will have this information as well. So all districts will be part of the accreditation process for this coming school year. So we're concluding what we're calling part 1 and part 2. Part 1 being last school year, part 2 being this school year, and that the two parts together will equal one full accreditation cycle. So that then the following school year, 25-26, we will break into those 3-year cycles where districts will not be going every single year. So this is the last year of all districts, and then we'll break into those cycles next year. We do have a few new categories for our assurance, let me find it right here. This is what happens when I try to go too fast. For the assurance standards and for the ISAPs. So those new areas are listed here in Part B, highlighting the completion of the graduate profile, proficiency-based learning for curriculum and assessment, professional development plan, mentorship and induction, evaluation, and school climate. We have worked with the think tank for the past few months of stakeholders who have been very dedicated to making sure these rubrics, the scoring rubrics, are clear, concise, and specific, right specifically to what ARM states. There's no confusion as to where the information is coming from or what's being asked, along with the evidence that we're asking for this year. So I'm excited to have that released next Monday, the Criterion Reference Guide. My team will start putting on workshops to go through each of those areas, working with districts. We'll start up our office hours and really just be completely available to districts and getting them through the second year of the process. I could keep talking, Superintendent, but I can stop there to see if there's any questions. And like I said, this information will all be public next Monday. And of course, the easiest way to find that is on the OPI accreditation webpage.
Thank you, Crystal. I recognize that time is short at this point, but Crystal, you want to put in the chat box your information, people can go ahead and do that. And Cedar, if you would as well, so that any other questions might be answered on the assessment ones. And it can flow with us with all this information as well. I just want to reiterate, the accreditation process has changed. It is in a twofold process, but the ultimate end of this is to have schools accredited, districts accredited for a 3-year period, to give that opportunity of growth for a school, as well as for that student reflection within that relationship and that with the teacher in that classroom and learning. So we recognize that larger districts may have more administration and may have more opportunity than a smaller district. But the heart of this entire matter is growth and moving toward proficiency for our students in K-12. I think it paired really well with the assessment discussion that we had over our smarter, balanced, our older end of the year, and then more exciting and invigorated with our 3-year model that we are now doing and adding science, as well as a reading grant that is a gift, and our standards revisions that we've also talked about. So lots of things are happening. Thank you so much. Our school doors are open across our state, and we're really pleased that our teachers are teaching and our students are learning and our parents are confident in the safety of their children within the embrace of public school. So with that, thank you, OPI staff. You're rock stars. All of you, all of this information will be flowing. Oh, I do see Steve. We've got a hand up. How can we help?
Very quickly, I just want to thank you for all the great information today and all your staff, but I'd like to give a shout out to Brian. Yesterday, I needed some homeschool statewide data, and I was shocked. I sent him an email, and I didn't know how fast I could get a response, but within 5 minutes, I had what I was looking for. So, Brian, if you're out there, thank you so much for how quickly you responded, and you did a great job. So I just wanted to put that into the public forum.
Steve, thank you. Getting a pat on the back in government is really important, and making sure that government works for individuals as yourself in that space specifically. We're here for you. So with that, everyone, if there's no other things to add to this, blessings to all. It is a beautiful day across our state, and all the best. Thank you.